Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to a creative conversation. So, today in the house, I have a new friend, but someone who very quickly has shown just love and support my way. And I'm just happy to introduce her to you, my community. Her name is Kim Bushore-Maki, and she lives in Johnson City, Tennessee, and she runs an organization, Shakti in the Mountains, that I'll let her explain. But we had a very interesting story behind how we met, and it's only been a few months. It's March. So it's amazing how when you meet someone and right away, something about them just attracts their energy, everything about them. And I'm just so happy to have Kim in my tribe. Um, and Kim and I have been having conversations every week, and I feel like we should have recorded some of those earlier conversations. So good morning, Kim, to you.
Good morning.
And we're going to keep this conversation we're going to let it go however it goes, but we're trying to keep it under so many minutes. So I'll let Kim introduce herself and anything that she wants to share. And then we'll kind of get right to it. So Kim, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be a part of this conversation. So about exactly 10 years ago, actually, this month represents my 10th anniversary. I opened Shakti in the Mountains in Johnson City, Tennessee, with the intention of serving the feminine. It was my understanding that the feminine energy in our community and in the world at large was out of balance with the masculine energy. And I wanted to do something to address that imbalance. So I found this beautiful older home in Johnson City and renovated it so that it would feel like a second home to people. And that we have a beautiful organic garden in the backyard with a fire pit. And then when you walk inside, we have a fully functioning kitchen where we cook and have meals together. We do workshops and classes that nurture our bodies, our hearts, and our minds. And it is for anyone who wants to nurture that feminine energy within them. And then in addition to providing those community services, I'm also a psychotherapist and see clients one-on-one.
No, it's just so awesome. I'm part of your book club. We're reading a book right now, Rise Sister Rise, which has been completely awesome. And we started talking about, and which is really why I wanted to focus this conversation on embracing all parts of ourselves. And you've mentioned quite a few times the notion of shadow work. And I really want to understand that better. So this is actually collectively for me. And I hope that whoever's listening to this, that this will also empower you to be accepting of all the parts of ourselves. But I would love for you to share a little bit of what that means, and then I kind of have some questions to follow up with that, if you don't mind.
Sure. One of my favorite subjects. So shadow work came out of, he wasn't the first, but he was probably the person who really brought this onto the collective scene in modern times, and that's the psychologist Carl Jung. He talks about archetypes, and archetypes are these different parts of ourselves or energies that we all have. For example, the warrior is an archetype, mother is an archetype, and one of those archetypes is shadow. And shadow, it's the part of us that we regulate to the dark because we are afraid of it, we're ashamed of it, we're scared of it, we think it's ugly or bad. And when you decide to do shadow work, you are essentially shining a light into the dark and uncovering the buried treasure that lies in the dark. This is not work that is necessarily easy, but I would say it's very rewarding. Because once the concept of shadow work is when you can embrace all of you and accept all of you, then you're free. And it's my personal experience as well as professional experience that freedom is the greatest equalizer of all people. And it allows you to live this authentic life without trying to please other people or make yourself small.
You know what? As I was, doing a little digging, I came across a saying, or I'm not sure if it was a saying or quote, but it really resonated with me regarding shadow work. It says it's easier to observe others' shadows before acknowledging our own shadow. And that really, really resonated with me on how we can see the disparities in people, the version of them that they would show us versus the version of us that we really truly see. And it's easier for us to acknowledge that in others before we acknowledge that in ourselves. So what do you share our tools to start that journey? And where do you feel like people falter along that way? Like they think they want to start it because everyone wants this growth to happen, and we all know it starts with our own true value. So it's needed work. But where do you find, I'd love to start, but then once they realize what it entails, there's a period of time you're like, really, I'm not so interested in finding out more. So can you talk about a little bit of
Sure.
the struggle of, one, how to get to the point where you're ready to start, and then how to keep going when what you find isn't what you thought you would see?
Yeah. Well, I just want to start off by saying I have a lot of compassion and empathy for people who say they want to do it and then they stick their foot in the water and they're like, oh, I'm not so sure anymore. I'll tell a story on myself. When I first really started to do shadow work, I was involved in a training program called Phoenix Rising Yoga Therapy. And the mentor I was working with kept encouraging me to start and complete the unit on shadow work. And I was like, yeah, and I would make up all these excuses. That's one of the first signs. And then finally he said, I'm gonna be right here. And I was able to take the plunge, but I ended up delaying my graduation from that program by about 6 months because I delayed doing shadow work. So I have the utmost compassion and empathy for people. I will say the first time was the hardest. It got easier. And I'll also say that this is ongoing work. There's no way that I would do this 24/7 for days and days. But I have 4 rays into it. I do a little bit and I take a break. I do a little bit and I take a break. And I think that's another strategy. The other thing I would say is I wouldn't recommend doing it alone. You could read books and do some of this work alone. And life is so much sweeter when you have people to accompany you on the journey, people who don't judge, people who provide you a space and listen without giving you advice. And so one of the things that I do at Shakti in the Mountains is I routinely provide shadow work classes. I create a safe little incubator or space for people to do this work. And then they go take a break. And when they're ready, they come back. Some of the things that I share with people is, number one, this, anytime you are getting really upset by someone else's behavior, that could be a sign that they are showing you something about your shadow that you are not liking. And let me give an example. If you're like, I can't stand the way this person in my group is acting. She thinks she's so great. She does this, she does that. When you find yourself really focusing on the behavior of another person to the extreme, that's typically a tip off that you're projecting. And projection simply means I'm putting my stuff onto someone else, like I'm projecting a movie. And it's not to say that there aren't people who will do something that will upset you and it's legitimate upset. What I'm talking about is when we cannot let it go. We keep going back to it and back to it. And when I do that, which we all do, I will pause and say, okay, what is it about this person that they're showing me about myself?
Mhm.
And that's not easy work. It's typically not flattering. And the trick to doing that is to have a lot of self-compassion.
Mhm.
Shadow work, we didn't create a shadow in a vacuum. The way I like to explain it is, ever since we were little children, we had people in our life who would say things like, I'm really disappointed in you, or don't ever do that, that's horrible. There's a whole
Mhm.
continuum of reactions, but the bottom line of these reactions are, you got the message that what I'm feeling or what I'm doing is not okay.
Mhm.
And if I want people to like me and love me, then I need to get rid of that thing that's not okay. And that's what gets stuffed in the shadow. And the way that I teach shadow work, as I say, it's just, we all have needs. And when, especially when we were children, we didn't necessarily understand all the different ways to get our needs met. And when we had people in our life say things like, don't do that, or I'm disappointed in you, then what happened is we thought the need was wrong. And
Mhm.
so part of what we do in shadow work is we go back and we reclaim that initial or original need, and we say, how can we get this need met that doesn't make us feel ashamed or dirty or bad or wrong?
Wow.
And that's part of that liberation.
I'm writing so many good things down. It's not like I'm not recording it, so I don't know why I'm acting like I'll never hear it. I'm like taking it in like, oh my goodness, it's so good.
It's
Okay.
beautiful work.
Yeah.
It really is, because it's about saying it's okay to want to be loved. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay, right? Like, all of these needs and
Mm.
feelings are totally normal and natural. It's part of being a human. And of course, when I was younger, I did not know how to articulate that in a way that didn't hurt people or embarrass people or upset people. But that doesn't mean the need was wrong.
No, I love that. And I wanted to, at first, I wasn't sure about why I was asking you to kind of go deep at the onset of the conversation, but I think it gives it more perspective now for the follow-up question. So when I think about who I am to this point now and the journey that I had to follow, I love that we started with this really deeper part of the conversation, because I really want to understand how you got to this place from, I don't know your starting point. Like, I hear you now, I met you now, I met you in this particular point of time. But where in your journey did you realize that there was more for you to do? And what were the signs? I call them breadcrumbs. I don't know the word that you used, that told me there was more for me to do. And this was a path that I needed to follow. Can you talk a little bit about that the finding Kim part of your journey?
Sure. I will say that from a fairly young age, I was driven by righting wrongs, meaning if I perceived something as being unjust, I felt this burning desire to do something about that. In fact, my mom used to say to me a lot as a child, pick your battles, Kim, pick your battles. Because I was ready to fight everybody on every front, which is not sustainable. Um, and and I in college, I remember thinking I want to do something on a large scale. So my initial majors was international studies. I was going to travel and do all these cool things, except for the fact that I really suck at foreign languages. And you have to be able to speak at least one other language to be an international studies major. So that led me into the field of psychology and history, which is what I majored in. History, because I'm fascinated by people and their stories. And to me, history is just one big story about the human condition. And psychology, because I wanted to understand why people did what they did. And while I was in college, I volunteered at a domestic violence shelter.
Mm.
And that just clicked for me. I like I said, I've always wanted to support the underdog and make things just. And that's a field that is riddled with injustices and wrongdoing.
Mm.
Um, and then I graduated and went to work in community mental health, and eventually went to work at a university. After I got my master's degree in counseling, I worked in a university in their counseling center. And through one beautiful experiences, got to meet a wider range of people. I had better understandings of, anything from domestic violence to extreme poverty to extreme mental illness. And realized that what it all boiled down to is people just wanted a place to belong and feel loved. It didn't matter how big your bank account was or what prior traumas you had experienced. That was at the root of it all. And I got to this point where I didn't want to be reacting. It felt I wanted to be proactive. And unfortunately, our institutions are so big and so bureaucratic that it's hard for them to turn on a dime, right? They can't do it. It's like if you had this big aircraft carrier and you said, let's go this way, it would take them a long time to turn that aircraft carrier around. And I wanted something that was more agile and flexible. So that meant leaving the university with full-time benefits and starting my own women's center, which I called Shakti in the Mountains. And there are pros and cons, right? There for working at an institution and for being self-employed. I felt like the agility and the flexibility of self-employment was better suited to my needs. Certainly not to my pocketbook, but to my needs. And so that's that. And each step along the way, for example, I'm not kidding you, the day after I went from full-time at the university to part-time, my husband got laid off from work.
Wow.
And so, right. And so there were times where my decision to leave this salaried position was greatly challenged. And then something would happen and I'd be like, I'm on the right path. I would get this validation or affirmation spontaneously. Like, it's not like I called a friend and said, tell me something good. But rather something would happen that would remind me, like, no, this is what you're meant to do. Stay the course, get through this hard time. In the course of me leaving my job at the university full time to the time where we bought the house where Shakti in the Mountains is located, my husband was laid off from work 3 different occasions. This was during the 2008, 2009 recession. And each time there was this knee-jerk reaction I had of, should I go get a job? And I was like, no, we're going to figure this out. And we always figured it out. But I want to say I didn't act alone. I was able to make that happen because I have a lot of family and friends who believe in me and trust me and support me. And that's why I said earlier in regards to shadow work, we're not meant to do this work alone. We're meant to do it in community. I like the expression, there is immunity in community. And at the end of the day, that's what Shakti in the Mountains is all about, is building a community where people can do this beautiful, deep work so that they can be their authentic selves. And like I said, we're not meant to do it alone.
Yeah, I can't wait to come back. I haven't yet to come to the house, but we've talked so much, I feel like I'm part of the house. And I can't wait to share my very first experience when we're able to meet in person again. I find our conversation, it was more than I could do to not cry when you shared about it is sweeter when you have to be accompanied on this journey. I just find so much solace in the work that I'm trying to do and in how I'm trying to serve. And then when I meet other people that are trying to serve, and then it just makes all the sense in the world. During this time, we've all had to pivot. I know that you have as well. So
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about how you've pivoted during this time and how you're maintaining and nourishing yourself um, to prepare for outside opening back up, the ability to meet in person again. Like, what are you now in transition to mentally starting getting ready for that? But how are you kind of nourishing to keep yourself whole so you're ready for the next part of this journey?
Yeah, that's an ongoing journey for sure. So I have made the decision that I will do nothing in person till June 1st, and even then, that's not a firm date. I see myself slowly integrating some in-person activities, and because it's summer, I'm going to have those activities outside instead of inside the house. And I feel like this pandemic is was necessary. Not that I wished anyone dead, of course not. I'm saying that we had to have a big shakeup, not only locally but globally, for us to look at how humans are impacting their environment. I think sometimes we forget we're a part of the ecosystem. It's a superiority complex that humans have. And it's not, and part of it is, like, for example, our air and our water are cleaner because there's less, fewer humans are flying and driving cars, etc. But it's more than just pollution. It's also the way we choose to spend time and who we choose to spend time with. It feels like getting back to basics. And I am reluctant to do anything to disrupt that learning curve. And so I don't want to immediately open back up and act like everything's same old, because I don't think it is. And I also don't think this is going to be our last pandemic.
Right.
For example, I heard a scientist say that because Earth's temperatures are warmer, the permafrost at the poles is melting, and there are viruses and bacteria in that permafrost that are now being released. And so it's really naive of us to think that this corona virus is going to be the last time that we have some strange virus we're not used to. And so I feel like what we're being asked to do is reevaluate our relationship with the ecosystem and how we want to behave in it and with each other. And that's where I've been pivoting. So of course I've been offering online services, but I've also been doing less. I can be really type A and have a very full schedule, especially because I'm an extrovert and I love being around people. And I realized once this self-isolation, social distancing time period hit, that I was actually really tired. I was not paying enough attention to my own energy levels. And I don't want to go back to where I was before. I do want to be of service. I do want to see people, but not to the same level that I was. So that was a really good lesson for me. I'm also spending more time outside. I'm gardening. There are activities that I am now able to do that I didn't have the time to do before. And so one of my lessons is, how do I restructure my life so that this whole spectrum is met? And it is my sincere hope that we're all asking ourselves those questions.
No, that's awesome. I have two more questions. One is a personal question. So we met at a bookstore, and you had a bunch of books that day. I know
yes,
some of
I'm
them
a
for other people.
bibliophile.
Yeah, some of them for other people. But did you buy anything that day that you've read that I was just interested in what you bought for you, because we never had that conversation of what you actually did buy, because I actually didn't buy anything. I met you. That was the whole purpose, that I needed to be in the bookstore, because I actually got to the bookstore and was like, I don't need a book. So why am I here? You were the reason I was in the bookstore, but you actually did buy books. So did you buy anything that day that has served you, that you would recommend for others to read? And then the last question is, what are you actually doing as part? I know you love to read and you have other avenues that nourish and support you. So what are you recommending right now that we can share for my audience?
Oh, wow. Okay, so time for true confessions. I buy books and don't always read them immediately as part of my addiction. So I have one of the books that I have started from the time I met you, but I have not finished, um, is called Natural Causes by Barbara Onrick. I can't remember if
Okay.
I'm pronouncing her last name. And this is the same woman who wrote the book called Nickels and Dimes, where she lived as a minimum wage earner and talked about what was like, could she make ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
And so she is a really fascinating woman. She has a PhD in cellular immunology.
Wow.
However, she chose not to practice as a scientist. Instead, she chose to be a scientific journalist.
Mm.
And this book, Natural Causes, is looking at our healthcare system. And one of the things that she says is, because humans in general are healthier than at any other point in human history, primarily because we have things like antibiotics. People used to die a lot earlier because we didn't have these amazing drugs that we do now. She said that the way the medical industry has to make money is to have prevention testing. So think mammogram, pap smears, colonoscopies, that sort of thing. And she started to do some research on how necessary all of those interventions were. And because she is now in her 70s, she's decided that she would rather spend her time doing other things than waiting in sterile waiting rooms for a preventative exam. And that's just in the first chapter of the book. So I'll tell you more later. But it really, to me, it's about like, and I think this is something that I love to geek out on is astrology, especially because there's a marriage between astrology and Jungian psychology, which is one of my first loves. And right now, I've been hearing this phrase that astrologers have been using called "do your Saturn." And Saturn is the planet that represents our structures, our organizations, and also our work, like why we were put on this planet. Mm-hmm. So do your Saturn means do the work you were meant to do, not the work your parents thought you should do, not the work that your high school guidance counselor said you were supposed to do, but what you know to be true for yourself. And that has been a real source of comfort for me to get really clear on what was the work I was meant to do. And every time I step off the path of that, I get a real hard hit like, girlfriend, you need to get back here on this path. And it's really about becoming your own authority. And I feel like there's a lot of corruption that we're seeing in governments across the world. Mm-hmm. And before we used to be told like respect respect the authority figures in your life. And we're seeing all this disruption. And so I feel like the other thing that kind of keeps me is it doesn't matter what anybody else is saying. If I think I should wear a mask in public because I don't want to get people sick, then that's what I need to do. Those are the kind of things. So that's the book, and the, kind of my hobby is like looking into astrology. But in terms of the other things is I've been doing a lot of physical movement. I now walk from my house to Shakti in the mountains instead of drive my car. I teach yoga and have my own practice of that. I'm learning a new body movement from another teacher called gyrokinesis, and it's making my body feel really wonderful and supported. Mm-hmm. I'm working in the garden. I'm making homemade bread. so those are the things that I'm doing to support myself so that I can show up and be of service to my community.
No, that's so awesome. I feel like we've known each other for like longer than what 3 months. I don't know what since March, but this is just amazing time. You're an amazing human being. Thank you for serving others with your passion. I'm so excited to be able to drive. You're just 3 hours from Charlotte, less than 3 hours, I think. So I'm excited for whatever that would look like. I don't really like bread that much, but I think I've seen some of the pictures you've posted. It looks amazing.
Thank
It
you.
looks
I'll make you
amazing.
something else.
But I like bread. I mean, I like it, but I just don't. I know people that can eat a loaf of bread. I love just having fresh bread, but I don't like crave it per se. So, but it looks amazing. I would want to taste it, is what I'm saying. So, but thank you for what you shared. I'll get the formal name of the books to include in the post. We honor you. Thank you. And I hope you have a really, really, really awesome June 1st when you figure out what that looks like for you. And just thank you for showing up in your authentic way. So it just helps others be able to do the same. So
Thank you for inviting me, Kim. And please keep doing the work you're doing. It matters.
thank you.